there is the opposite of our beloved distributive property, which is called factoring. Sometimes, just to get you thinking about it, and please don't ever use this when you go somewhere else in the world, because they'll say I'm probably the worst teacher in the world. Factoring is like the reverse distributive property. Okay? Factoring is the reverse of distributive property. That would be where you would have something like this, 7a plus 7b. Remember I said with the distributive property you have to have parentheses? Well, there's no parentheses there, but there will be when we're done. Factoring says rather than distributing out, you need to look and see what thing can you take out of both things and pull them out. Rather than giving in, we're pulling out. And you look and see it, both what we call terms. What do you see that they both have that you could divide them by? What common factor do they both have? I know it's not obvious, but what do you see in both of them? 7. So what happens is you put your 7 on the outside and you do what we say, factor out the 7. You say, well, if I have 7a and I really am dividing by 7, if I take 7 and divide it by 7, I end up with just the a. And if I have 7 and divide it by 7 for the second term, I'm left with just the b. It's the reverse of the distributive property. If I use the distributive property here, I would get back to where I started from. So going back to the screen where we just did, every one of these, if I were told to factor, I could factor it. If I was given this and asked to factor it, I would end up back where I started with this. If I was given this and it said, please factor this, I would end up with this. It's taking a 7 out of both ones and you're dividing, not subtracting, but dividing, and you get that. So let's look at one. What about this? I'm just going to grab it from the book because my mind's ax plus ay. Ax plus ay. And it says to factor. And the key is the word factor. Where do we see factors? What are factors? Factors are two things that get multiplied together. The factors of 72 are 8 and 9. So you want to change this into something that is two things multiplied together that's the same as that. So you look and you say, okay, what do they have in common that I can take out? Andrew?
A.
Pardon?
A.
Oh, A. And if you take an a out, here's the deal. You're going to have two terms in there because there's two terms there, and it's going to be a plus in the middle. If I take an a out of ax, I am left with just the x. If I take an a out of ay, I'm left with just the y naught. Now what you must be careful with here, what did I do, Maggie? You can't solve it, there's no equal signs. I mean, if they asked you, if they told you what x and y were, well, if you told, yeah, but you'd still have an a out here unless they told you what a was. If they told you what all three of them were, you wouldn't need to shift right, you just put it in there and you could still just do it. So, here's where you have to be careful, children. Take a look-see. What if I have this? 8b minus 8. And I asked you to factor that. You are going to look and say, I can take out a and, Brian?
B. 8.
There's no b in this one. I can take an 8 out. And here's where one must be careful. There are two terms here. There's a minus sign. In my answer, there also has to be those two terms with a minus sign. If I take an 8 out of 8b, I'm left with the b. Everybody's good with that. But here, I have an 8 and there's an 8 there. Do I skip and there's nothing there? There is a...
8.
Nope.
0.
Bella?
0.
Nope. Maggie? There's a 1 there. Because remember I said it's like dividing. What is 8 divided by 8? A 1. You have to go back to this if you multiply. And what do I multiply 8 by to get back to the 8 would be a 1. So if it's the same thing, you have to put something there that has to be a 1. If I put a 0 there, then there would be no 8 there when I remultiply. Good point down there, I thought. And can I tell you, if you understood any of that, or most of that, you're better than most I've had, because people seem to struggle immensely with this, and I don't know why. I know you do, but that's... now, take a look at this, and here's where a lot of people go wrong. 24x minus 12. And I ask you to factor somebody, tell me what you think, pray tell, you would get if I asked you to factor that. So you look at those two things and say, one of those into both of those things. What can I divide both of them by? Andrew?
2 parentheses x minus 1.
2 parentheses what?
X minus 1.
Now, I'm going to tell you that if I remultiply this, I get 2x, not 24x, and if I multiply 2 times 1, I get 2 and not 12. If you take a 2 out of this, you divide it by 2, which is 12. And if you divide 2 into 12, you get 6. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to tell you that's still not right. Well, it's kind of like half right and half wrong. When you are asked to factor, you always want to factor out the biggest number. Because I could actually factor out a 6 there, couldn't I? 6 goes into 24 4 times, and I get 4x minus 2. However, that's still not right. Why? Because I could factor something more than a 6 out of that. I could factor out a 12, realistically. What I should do is factor a 12 out. When I factor 12 out, 12 goes into 24 2 times, 12 goes into 12 once. This really is the sole true answer. Even though technically this is factored, this is the one we're going for. You always try to factor the greatest thing out. You've seen Fear Factor, right?
No.
Yes. You're too young for Fear Factor. I don't know either. Oh, so much to do, so little time to do it. I'm kind of tired of talking. Okay.
You need to back up.